So after loading the recipe data from our API, let's now render that data in our application. And for that, let's go to our HTML file to basically get the template from there. Let's close down this terminal, which will keep working in the background. And so here is the results part, the pagination, and then here we have the recipe class. So the recipe class is basically this whole container. So here in this case, it's this whole gray container, which is the one that will contain the rendered recipe. Okay, then right now it has that message. So again, it is this message here that is already rendered there at this point. Then here is the code for a loading spinner, for an error, and then here actually for the recipe itself. So here we have that image, and then all of the information about the recipe itself. And so it's all of this code that we need now. So let's grab all of this commented out code and copy it and paste it here into this function. So let's add a comment here. So loading recipe, and then afterwards, as step number 2, rendering the recipe. And for now here we are doing this like really big function. But of course, once we start thinking about the architecture, we will then break this up into functions and modules and classes and so on and so forth. And so, as always, doing a big template literal here, just as always, so that we can then replace all the data here that we need. Just fixing the indentation here now. And so now let's take all the data that we need. And the first one here is the image. So let's replace this string here with recipe.image. So just like we specified here. And so this image property is basically a URL which points to the location of the image on the Forkify API server. Then here we have the recipe title. So this one here. Dot title. And actually we also have that title here as an alt text of the image. Okay, then here we have the clock. So this 45 here is the cooking time. So recipe, and missing the block here, dot cooking time. Then down here we have servings, and so that's this number here. So number 4 will now be replaced with the data coming from the recipe object. So recipe.servings. And let's keep going. So down here we have the ingredients. So for each ingredient, there will be one list element of this. So in this example, right now we have 2 list elements and 1 for each ingredient. But let's actually keep that for later. And for now, keep filling the rest of the data here. So this is the next piece of data, which is the publisher. So here it says recipe publisher. And so let's change that to recipe.publisher. Then here we have the source URL. So let's take a look at that, maybe here to make more sense of this. So we used most of this data here already. So here is the URL to the recipe itself, where it actually comes from. And then about the ingredients, as you see, it is one array, and each position of the array contains one object, which contains the quantity, the unit, and the description of each ingredient. And so we will have to basically loop over this array and then use all of this data to create one list element for each of them. Okay, But for now, let's go back and finish the data here. And in this case, replacing this URL by the one coming from the object. So that's recipe.source URL. And so except for the ingredients, that's actually it. So yeah, before we can check out the result, of course, now we need to actually insert this HTML into our DOM. So for that, we can use the insert adjacent HTML method. And we need to do that on the parent element, remember. And I already selected that up here. So remember, that's the element with the class of recipe. So just to remember, it is this div element. So that is called recipe container. And so that's where we want to attach this HTML markup. So recipe container dot insert adjacent HTML. Then let's do after begin. So basically as a first child, and then the markup variable that we just created. And that should be it. So this should now render the recipe in the user interface, except for the ingredients. And indeed, that's looking really nice already, right? So the ingredients are still the old ones, but the rest is really nice, except for that we have still this message here from the beginning, and also that we are missing all the icons. So you see, there are no icons to be found here. In the real one, of course, there are icons all over the place. So we have three problems here. We have this message showing, we have the ingredients, and we have the icons. And let's start with this message and then the ingredients. So before we insert any new markup, we need to get rid of the markup that is already there. So let's simply do recipe container dot inner HTML and set it to nothing. So emptying it out. And so you see, now it is gone. All right. So let's now worry about the ingredients. And again, we will need to loop over the ingredients array. And for each of them, we should then create this kind of markup here. So how should we do that? Well, basically exactly what I just said. So we take recipe.ingredients, and then we loop over that using some array method. But what array method should we actually use? Well, remember that in the end, the expression that we need here needs to return a string of HTML. And so that means that our array method needs to return something. So for each is not the way to go here. So not for each, right? But instead, we are going to use map. So map returns a new array with the same length. And so that array we will then in the end be able to simply join. And so now we can loop over the array by specifying a callback function. So each element is going to be called ingredient. And then here we can do something. So let's simply replace a string here. Right? So taking this and put it right here. And then of course we don't need this one anymore. Okay. Then here we have some kind of error. But never mind. Let's think about the data here first. So let's take a look at the data actually again. So at the array, so each array element is an object which has quantity, unit, and description. Okay. So this ingredient is now that object. And so here we can say ingredient dot quantity, then here the unit, so ingredient dot unit, and then finally here instead of pasta, we want the ingredient dot description. And so now here we will have an array in which each element will contain this markup corresponding to the ingredient. And so now all we need to do is to transform that array of strings into one big string. So we can take the result of this map, which is that array, and call join on it like this. And so now the result of this entire expression is going to be a big string containing all the ingredients. So if we give it a save now, then indeed, here we have our 8 ingredients. Okay, so that's pepperoni pizza burgers. And now, remember we have a second one here, so let's switch them out again. Give it a save, and now we get, well, this pizza here. And so indeed, it now has different ingredients, different publisher, and everything is different. Great. But now there is one thing missing, which is the icons. So let's see why that is. Well, remember that the page that is displayed here in the browser is this HTML here from the dist folder, right? And so remember that all the images and really all the assets are now coming from this folder. And that includes the icons. So our icons are always coming from this icons.svg file. But now the icons are actually coming from icons.all of this here. And you can see that, for example, right here in the search bar. So icon search is coming from icons.96 and so on and so forth. However, in our template literal, we are still writing basically the old path to the icons. So this one here. And so right now, JavaScript will not be able to find this. So in the dist folder, this one here, there is no source / image folder in which there is icons.svg, because that exists only in our source folder. So only right here where we are developing the application. But again, right now, we are basically shipping the application already. And so it's using the data from this dist folder. And so now we need a way of telling our JavaScript that the icons file is no longer this one, but instead it is this one. And we can actually do that with Parcel by basically simply importing the icons file. So let's go to the top of our file, because I like to keep all the imports always at the top. And so again, in Parcel, we can import more than just JavaScript files. We can import all kinds of assets, and that includes images. So let's import, and let's call it simply icons, but this name can be anything that we want. From, and now the path to the original icons file, basically from the view of this controller file, right? So here we are in controller.js, and so now we need to find the path to the images. So to this original icons file. So we need to go one way up. So exactly the way we browse the file tree in the terminal. So ... always means the parent folder. And so right now we are back in the source folder, which is the parent of JS. And then from there, we can go into images and then icons.svg. All right. Now, this is the way it used to work in Parcel 1. So if for some reason you are running Parcel 1, then this is the way to go. But in Parcel 2, it works almost the same way. But then for any static assets that are not programming files, so for any like images or videos or sound files, we need to write URL, then colon, and then the path to the file. Okay, so let's take this out. And then let's log this icons to the console so that you see what this icons really is. Because in fact, it is nothing more than simply the path to the new icons file. So the localhost 1234 is in this case basically our dist folder. And then in there, the file that we need is icon.96f and so on and so forth. And so that is exactly this file here. Okay? And so now let's use that. So everywhere it says icon, so everywhere we have this old path, we now want to replace it simply with the icons. So let's select all of them using Command or Control D. Or if that doesn't work for you, you can always probably use Command F or something like that. But anyway, now we have all of them selected at the same time. And then I can delete them all and then insert the icons variable here everywhere. And so now, if we give this a save, then our icons are back, right? So starting here, then in all ingredients, and here also all over the place, we now have our icons back. And now just to finish this lecture, I want to give this one more touch, which is this here. So watch what happens here in the recipe when I load the page. Well, that was pretty fast. Let's see again. So maybe for half a second or so, you saw a loading spinner there. And so that's what I want to have here as well. So before the recipe arrives, I want like a loading spinner there, because that's a very common pattern that you see in all kinds of applications, right? And it's actually very simple. So we have the code already here in our HTML. So it is this spinner here. So let's grab this code. And then here I will simply create an external function called render a spinner. And let's make this a very generic function that we can reuse. And so let's pass in the parent element. And so then we can simply attach this to any parent element that is passed in here. So as always, creating a markup variable. And then our code here. And just like before, we need to now replace this old path with the new path. So icons. And then, of course, we need to add this HTML to the DOM as a child of the parent element in this case. So parent element dot insert adjacent HTML after begin and markup. Okay, and now let me just quickly show you why this is going to work. So here in the CSS, let's look for spinner. And here you see that the icon inside of the spinner class has this rotation animation that keeps going forever. So that's this infinite attribute here in the animation property. And this rotation animation I created here manually using keyframes. And basically what it does is to rotate the element to 360 degrees. And so if you ever need a spinner like this, you can simply basically copy this code here. All right. Let's close what we don't need here. And probably before we insert this, we should also clear the parent element. So just like before, setting the inner HTML to nothing. And now let's actually render the spinner. So let's do that here as we load the recipe. So right here. So render spinner, and then the parent element in this case is going to be the recipe container. All right, let's go back and reload. And there it was. You saw it. Let's make this a little bit slower by changing our network speed here. And so it took a little bit longer, maybe slow 3G, is going to be even better. And so now it's going to take a lot more time. But indeed, here it is. So that spinner is a nice touch, I think. And it definitely makes this application feel more real world. Now, just to finish this video, something that I should have done in the last video already is to add polyfills for ES6 features to our code base. So just like we did in the previous section as well. So remember to do that. We installed some special packages. So the packages are called npm core.js, and we can actually install multiple packages at the same time. I think I never did this before. So this is how it works. Regenerator runtime, and then hit enter, and then let's wait for these packages to download. And here they are. So they should be, yeah, so right here. And now all we have to do is to import them here at the top of our file. And so with this, we make sure that most real old browsers are still being supported by our application. So actually, we don't even need to save it anywhere. We can just say core.js and then stable. So VS Code, one more time, is really smart and can really help us with package imports like this. So again, this one here is for polyfilling async await, and this one here is for polyfilling everything else. And we could just cherry pick some features and only import those, but let's simply polyfill everything. Okay, don't need this terminal anymore. This one here already reloaded, and you see everything keeps working the same. All right, so we have this working. Now in the next video, let's quickly add some event handlers so that after that we can start talking about the architecture.